You know, what's worse than finding lipstick on your partner's collar? Finding it on their credit card statement. That's what I told my therapist the day after I discovered everything. Her face remained professionally neutral, but I caught that subtle flicker of shock. Even professionals aren't always prepared for the calm precision of a woman who's been betrayed but refuses to self-destruct in response. I'm Cassandra, and I'm still not entirely comfortable sharing this story. 3 months ago, I was just another accomplished entrepreneur with what I believed was a happy marriage. 17 years with the same man, building a life together. While I grew my digital branding agency from scratch into a thriving company with 32 employees, my husband, Martin, supposedly supported my drive, celebrated my milestones, and acted proud of everything I'd achieved. I should have seen the signs. Success can make certain kinds of men feel invisible. It began with a notification from our shared Visa account. A $389 charge at Belle Maison, an upscale French bistro in the Upper East Side that Martin and I had visited once, 3 years ago, for our anniversary. The timing struck me. It was a Wednesday, and he was supposedly in Seattle for a supply chain summit. A chill gripped my gut. I've always had razor-sharp instincts in business. That same instinct that told me when a pitch was empty or a deal was rigged now screamed that something in my marriage was very, very wrong. But I didn't confront him right away. That's what he would have expected. Tears, accusations, the classic scorned wife routine. That would have given him control. Let him steer the narrative, shape my reaction instead of facing his actions. So instead, I did what I do best: investigate. I hired a private investigator, not the trenchcoat stereotype, but a cyber forensics expert with an outrageous hourly rate and worth every cent. Within 6 days, I had everything. Her name, Sienna Torres. She was 29 to my 44, worked as a content strategist at a midtown agency, and the messages between them made my stomach churn. Not just the intimacy, but the way he talked about me. My wife's always buried in her company. We hardly connect anymore. Cassandra's idea of a date night is analyzing client data over wine. I'm only staying because separating would be a financial mess. You're the one I really want. Every message felt like a scalpel, expertly slicing through every illusion I'd clung to. The PI had even tracked 8 business trips over the past year that were actually secret getaways with Sienna. Restaurant bills, hotel reservations, even a weekend at a Hamptons Inn that Martin had claimed was a leadership retreat. The night I went through all the files, Martin came home late, as usual. He kissed my cheek with rehearsed detachment, asked how my day was, and casually mentioned he might have to travel again next month for some client meetings. I smiled and told him I'd made his favorite dinner. We ate while he scrolled through his phone under the table, thinking I wouldn't notice. "You seem quiet tonight," he said. Finally, when the silence stretched too long, I looked up from my plate and studied his face. The same face I'd woken up to for 17 years. A face that now, in a way, belonged to someone else. "Just thinking about a potential new hire," I replied. "Someone who could really shake things up at the company." "That's my girl," he said, with that condescending smile I'd come to loathe, always branding me as the workaholic. I nodded and took a slow sip of wine, letting the plan crystallize in my mind. Because Martin wasn't entirely wrong. I was always thinking about business. And in business, you don't react with emotion. You analyze, you strategize, you find leverage. And yet, beneath the composure, something inside me pulsed with a quiet ache. This wasn't just a strategy session. I was holding back a scream with every bite of dinner. Every word he spoke, casual, comfortable, cruel in its thoughtlessness, reminded me how easily he lied, how seamlessly he existed in both worlds. The world where I was the dependable wife, and the world where he whispered love to someone else. But I didn't let the ache show. I swallowed it whole. Because this next move, it had to be flawless. "Actually," I said, placing my glass down with calculated precision, "I think this might be my most brilliant staffing decision yet." But he wasn't even listening anymore. Already back to his phone, probably texting her right there at our dinner table. That night, as he slept next to me, I opened my laptop and pulled up Sienna Torres's resume and social media accounts. She was young, ambitious, with just enough experience to be valuable, but not enough to ask for top-tier pay. Still employed, but according to her recent LinkedIn activity, she was quietly job hunting. Perfect. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, not from hesitation, but from the weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just recruitment. This was reclamation. Of power, of dignity, of narrative. By sunrise, I drafted a job posting that might as well have had her name on it. Senior brand strategist at my agency. A big promotion from her current role, with a compensation package she'd be foolish to pass up. The best part? She had no clue who I was. Martin had always kept my world separate from his. He'd never even visited my office. In his professional circles, I was just Cassandra, his wife who runs some agency downtown. He hadn't posted a single photo of us together on his meticulously curated Instagram. I closed my laptop just as the first light painted the bedroom walls, and for the first time since I'd uncovered the affair, I felt something other than betrayal. Power. The scales were finally tilting. "What are you doing up so early?" Martin mumbled from his side of the bed. I turned to him, wearing the sweetest smile I could manage, just making sure everything's in place for what comes next. The interview process moved quickly. I kept my distance, letting my HR director handle the initial screening. Sienna's application came in just days after we posted the listing. Her cover letter practically buzzed with eagerness. Her credentials were impressive, honestly. Martin might be garbage, but apparently he had solid instincts when it came to professional women. I personally reviewed her materials, scanning for anything that suggested she might suspect who I was. Nothing. Martin had done a spectacular job of making me a ghost in his life. To Sienna, I was likely nothing more than a vague roadblock, the wife to be quietly waited out. The first time I saw her in person was at the final interview. I arranged to watch from behind the one-way glass in our conference room while my executive team led the session. My heart pounded so hard, I was sure it echoed through the walls. She was beautiful, of course, younger than me. Carried that spark of confident charm found only in people who've never truly been crushed by disappointment. Her hair was styled into a sharp designer bob. Her outfit screamed monthly payments, not savings. But as she spoke fluently about market trends, strategic branding, and client acquisition, I didn't see a manipulative homewrecker. I saw something else: intelligence, drive, and a woman who believed she was building something for herself. Almost admirable. Almost. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "She's exactly what we need for the Lancaster campaign," my VP of Operations said afterward. "When can she start?" "Make the offer today," I replied. "I want her onboarded by next week." The day Sienna accepted our offer, Martin came home with flowers. It was a random Tuesday, no birthday, no milestone, no reason. My stomach tightened. "What's this for?" I asked, accepting the bouquet with the best impression of pleasant surprise I could muster. "Can't a man just appreciate his wife?" he said, kissing my cheek, his hand resting at my waist just a beat too long. I couldn't help but wonder if those same hands had been on Sienna's earlier. The sweetness of the gesture almost made me sick. Not because of the flowers, those were predictable, but because of how effortlessly he slipped into the role of devoted husband. The lies were no longer just words in a text. They were blooming, petal by petal, in my living room. Later that evening, while he was in the shower, I checked his phone. A text lit up the screen. "Can't meet this weekend. Family obligation I can't get out of. We'll make it up to you next week." The family obligation was his cousin's wedding. He'd tried to dodge it until I insisted we go together. So now I was his excuse. And the bouquet? A guilt bribe, neatly tied in cellophane. I gave the flowers to our housekeeper the next morning. Sienna's first day at the agency was a masterclass in self-control. I stayed in my office until midday, skimming reports, mentally rehearsing. Then I walked into the orientation lunch with practiced ease, shaking hands with each new hire. "Welcome to Westwell & Co. I'm Cassandra Westwell, founder and CEO." When I got to Sienna, our eyes met. I scanned her face for a flicker of realization. Nothing. Just enthusiastic professionalism, maybe even a hint of nervousness at meeting the CEO. "Sienna Torres, Senior Brand Strategist," she said, her handshake confident. "I'm so excited to be here." "We have high expectations for you," I said, holding her gaze just a second too long. "I'll be monitoring your work closely." For a moment, I thought she might sense something. some deeper tension behind my smile, but she didn't. She was too focused on impressing me, too caught up in her own performance to recognize the stage she'd just stepped onto. Over the following weeks, I kept Sienna occupied with top-tier accounts, projects that required direct collaboration with me, and frequent late nights at the office. Each time she mentioned canceling plans, I offered gracious encouragement. That's the kind of commitment that makes us different. I wondered if Martin was growing impatient with her sudden unreliability. Whenever possible, I dropped subtle mentions of my husband, never his name, just light, offhand references. My husband and I went to that gallery opening last month. Or my husband's firm uses that vendor too. All the while, I watched. I watched her glance at her phone when she thought no one noticed. I watched the flicker of frustration in her eyes as she backed out of another evening plan. I watched her composure strain under the pressure of being pulled in two directions, neither of which she could explain. During this period, Martin's behavior began to shift. More late nights at the office, sharper moods at home, and increasingly flimsy excuses about where he'd been. I played my role flawlessly. The distracted, career-obsessed wife who never asked too many questions, too consumed by her business to notice his frequent absences. The breaking point came in month 2. I had assigned Sienna to a client in San Diego, a 3-day trip that, by complete coincidence, overlapped with Martin's supposed logistics seminar in the same city. I knew, thanks to ongoing surveillance, that they had planned to reunite there, probably their first real opportunity to see each other in weeks. I also knew what Martin had been texting her. She's completely cold these days. All she cares about is that damn agency. I'm thinking about how to end things with the least financial fallout. Reading those words had felt like being gutted by a blade too familiar to scream over. Cold, distant, career-obsessed. It was a caricature of me, deliberately drawn to justify his betrayal, but instead of drowning in it, I filed it away. Proof, evidence, fuel. My rage had cooled into something sharper, more useful, something I could wield. The night before Sienna was supposed to depart for San Diego, I called her into my office. I need to make a change to tomorrow's plans, I said evenly. Of course, she replied, poised and professional as ever. What do you need? I've decided to attend the San Diego meeting myself. You'll remain here to handle the Langston presentation instead. I watched the flicker in her composure, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. A slight widening of the eyes, a pause in her breath, mental recalibration. But I've prepared everything for San Diego, she said carefully. The Langston pitch will require just as much attention, I said, cutting her off. I trust you'll adapt. That's why we brought you on board, Sienna. Flexibility is key in our field. A flash of irritation crossed her face, but it vanished just as quickly. Understood, she said. As she walked out, there was the briefest hesitation in her step, like a dancer missing half a beat. I knew the text would be sent within seconds. I knew the panic it would cause. And I knew, without question, that whatever story Martin spun to cover it would be the third act of a play he was no longer directing. As she left my office, I caught a glimpse of her pulling out her phone, likely texting Martin to warn him that the plan had changed. I wondered what excuse he'd scramble to come up with now that their little getaway had been derailed. The answer came that evening. Bad news, honey, Martin announced over dinner. The San Diego seminar got rescheduled. Looks like I don't have to go after all. I took a sip of wine and nodded. What a shame. I know how much you were looking forward to it. He laughed a little too quickly. Looking forward to a seminar? Well, I said, swirling the wine in my glass, you seemed particularly enthusiastic about this trip. His eyes shifted away from mine. Just eager to close the Henderson contract, that's all. Funny coincidence, I said breezily. I'm heading to San Diego myself tomorrow, taking over a client meeting one of our brand strategists was supposed to lead. His fork froze midair. You are? I nodded. Last-minute shift. Business is unpredictable. Later that night, I reviewed the message trail from his phone while he showered. Can't believe the timing. C is going to San Diego now. Have to cancel completely. This is getting too messy. Her reply, this is the third time you've canceled. Starting to feel like I'm not a priority. It was unraveling. Not with fireworks, but with fractures. Hairline splits in the facade he had worked so hard to maintain. I didn't need to confront him. I just had to watch and wait. I smiled at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The cracks were beginning to show. I had given everything to this marriage, and they had treated me like nothing. Now, it was time for the next phase of my plan. People underestimate quiet women. They confuse our silence for weakness, our patience for indecision, our planning for delay. That's their first mistake. The second, thinking we don't see everything. I'd been watching Martin for 17 years. I knew his tells, the subtle changes in tone when he was lying, the twitch of his jaw when he was cornered. I knew his passwords. He reused the same formula, his mother's maiden name plus the date of our wedding. The irony of using our anniversary to conceal his betrayal wasn't lost on me. But more importantly, I'd also been observing Sienna. In her 2 months at my agency, I'd seen enough. She was sharp, motivated, quietly ambitious. Beneath her sleek exterior, though, there was a faint insecurity. Always reaching for validation, deeply romantic, and above all, fundamentally good. That last quality would eventually be her undoing. After the San Diego fallout, I changed tactics. Rather than pulling them apart, I started setting the stage for Sienna to see Martin for who he truly was. Not the charming, affectionate man she believed he was, but the calculating, self-serving manipulator I had come to know far too well. Step 1. I promoted her. She would now lead our new division focusing on financial services, a sector that conveniently overlapped with Martin's field as a regional sales director. It meant exposure to his network, his clients, and more importantly, his enablers. This is a significant vote of confidence, I told her during the meeting. You'll be our representative in front of some of the most prominent figures in the financial world. Her eyes sparkled with real pride. Thank you for trusting me. I won't let you down. I know you won't, I said. In fact, I'd like you to join me for dinner next week. A few key industry contacts will be there. They should meet the new face of our financial division. What I didn't mention was that these contacts included several of Martin's longtime colleagues, men who had covered for his escapades for years and who would recognize Sienna instantly. The dinner was set at Melon's, the city's most exclusive restaurant. As we waited for our guests, I kept the tone light, engaging Sienna in conversation. Over the past few weeks, I'd carefully shaped our dynamic, mentor and protege. I offered guidance, listened to her ideas, made her feel seen. Mind if I ask something a little personal? I said after our second glass of wine. She looked mildly surprised but nodded. Of course. Are you seeing anyone? I only ask, I added gently, because I've noticed you sometimes seem preoccupied, like there's something weighing on you. Her cheeks colored slightly. Is it that obvious? I gave her a sympathetic smile. Only to someone who's been there. She hesitated, then leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice. It's complicated. He's not exactly available. Ah, I said, nodding in understanding. Married. Her eyes went wide for a second. Don't worry, I assured her quickly. I'm not judging. Life is rarely clean-cut. Relief softened her features. He's unhappy in his marriage, she said. Has been for years. His wife is so wrapped up in her work, she barely sees him. She paused, looking a little guilty. Sorry, that must sound awful, coming from someone telling this to her boss, a woman with her own career. Also, no offense taken, I added smoothly before she could backtrack. Every relationship is different, though I've found men tend to invent convenient stories about their wives when they're chasing someone else. Before she could respond, our dinner guests arrived. 3 senior executives from rival financial firms, all of whom had worked closely with Martin. I watched their faces as they approached and instantly recognized Sienna. There were polite but awkward glances, overly cheerful greetings, and an unmistakable tension as they sat down. Throughout dinner, I subtly directed the conversation toward familiar topics: company culture, corporate events, spouses. I mentioned my husband several times, never by name, and watched as the men fidgeted, glancing at one another with barely concealed discomfort. Sienna noticed. Of course, she did. Her instincts were too sharp not to. But she couldn't quite figure out why something felt off. There was a flicker in her eyes, like a static charge before a storm. Uncertainty brewing just beneath the surface. I could almost see her mind turning, questioning, replaying moments that hadn't made sense before. A conversation. A delay. A pause too long when Martin spoke of his wife. As we wrapped up, One of the executives, Thomas, Martin's direct supervisor, pulled me aside. "Cassandra, I have to ask, does Martin know you've hired his?" He trailed off, visibly uncomfortable. "His what?" I asked, meeting his eyes without flinching. Thomas cleared his throat. "Nothing. Never mind." "No, please," I pressed, my voice cool but firm. "Go ahead and finish your thought." "It's not my place," he muttered, retreating. "You're right," I said simply. "It's not." On the ride back to the office, Sienna had left her car there. She sat unusually quiet beside me. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly. "Those men tonight," she said slowly. "They seem to know me, but I swear, I've never met them." I kept my eyes on the road. Financial services is a small world. Maybe they've seen you around at industry events. "Maybe," she murmured, clearly unconvinced. Her voice was small, too small for someone usually so polished. The doubt had taken root, and like all carefully planted seeds, it only needed time, pressure, and the right conditions to bloom into truth. The seed was planted, but I needed it to grow. The next phase came the following week. "I'd like you to attend Meridian Financial's holiday gala," I told her. "They're considering us for a rebranding project. This would be a great relationship-building opportunity." "Meridian Financial?" she echoed, voice pitched just slightly higher. "Yes," I replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" "No," she said quickly. "No problem at all." But I knew better. I knew she was spiraling inside. Meridian was Martin's company. She'd just been asked to attend his holiday party as our representative, while I would be attending as his wife. It was an inevitable collision, and she could feel it coming. I almost admired the way she held it together in that moment. Almost. But I knew what it felt like to have the ground crack beneath you, knew how betrayal echoes before it shatters. And now, it was her turn. What she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this for months. Quietly, carefully. Every message between them, captured through spyware my investigator had installed. Bank records, Martin using our joint credit cards to buy her gifts, hotel receipts, photos of them walking together, into restaurants, out of hotels, through his company's parking lot. I'd also been working with divorce attorneys, locking down my company's assets, preparing the battlefield. I'd already moved large sums from our shared savings into protected business accounts, fully legal, considering they were marked as legitimate operating capital. But effectively out of Martin's reach if things ended the way I planned. The night before the holiday gala, Martin was unusually attentive. He helped me choose my dress, a bold crimson gown he claimed would turn heads. He suggested I wear my hair up, exposing my neck the way he'd always said he liked. He was nervous. I could see it. Nervous about tomorrow night and trying to ensure I looked radiant when I inevitably came face to face with his mistress. The irony was almost poetic. He was grooming his wife to impress the woman he'd betrayed her with, while I was preparing that woman to realize she wasn't the only one being lied to. There was a twisted satisfaction in letting him think he still had control, letting him believe he was orchestrating the illusion. But I had already rewritten the script, and tomorrow, the curtains would rise. As I laid out my jewelry, Martin's phone buzzed with a message. I watched his face as he read it. A flicker of panic crossed his features before he forced composure. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly. "Fine," he said, too quickly. "Just work stuff. Always something." Later, while he was in the shower, I checked the message. It was from Sienna. "I have to attend your company's party tomorrow night for work." "What are we going to do?" Martin's reply, "Don't worry. My wife will be in a different part of the room. We'll barely interact. Just act professional. If we happen to cross paths, she won't suspect a thing." I returned the phone exactly as I'd found it and resumed choosing earrings for what would be my finest performance yet. The irony burned. His belief that I wouldn't suspect a thing, that I could stand in a room with the woman he'd betrayed me with and stay blissfully unaware. But what he didn't understand, what neither of them did, was that this was never just about discovery. It was about revelation, on my terms. The stage was set, all the players were in position. Tomorrow would change everything, but not the way they expected. That night, I went to bed feeling oddly at peace. For months, I had funneled pain into preparation, rage into resolve. While they assumed I was oblivious, I had been orchestrating their collapse with the same clinical focus I used to scale my company. They thought I poured everything into my work and neglected my marriage. They were about to find out just how dangerously they had underestimated me. The Meridian Financial Holiday Gala was hosted at the Grand Hilton downtown, an ostentatious display of champagne towers and ice sculptures designed to distract from another underwhelming fiscal year. I arrived on Martin's arm, the picture of elegant support in my red gown and classic updo. His hand was damp in mine. "You look incredible tonight," he said, for the third time since we left the house. "Everyone's going to be jealous I'm with you." I smiled, brushing his cheek gently. "That's sweet, but we both know I'm the lucky one." His expression faltered. "Guilt? Fear? Maybe both." "Let's get a drink," he mumbled, already slipping toward the bar. I scanned the room with practiced precision and spotted her immediately. Sienna stood near the entrance, a deep navy dress hugging her frame. Her grip on her clutch was white-knuckled, her eyes flicking anxiously around the room. Then she saw Martin. Her posture shifted instantly, shoulders back, chin lifted. The unmistakable posture of a woman who just spotted her secret lover. And then, her gaze found me, standing beside him. I watched the precise moment realization struck. Her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. Recognition. Shock. She had seen my photo before, on social media, maybe in passing on our company site, but seeing me in person, standing beside Martin, clearly rattled her. I pretended not to notice, accepting a flute of champagne from him, with a serene smile that made him exhale, just slightly. Poor Martin. He thought the worst had been avoided simply because we hadn't been formally introduced yet. "I should circulate," I told him. "Introduce myself to a few of the newer executives." "Of course," he said quickly, visibly relieved. "I need to check in with Thomas about the Hanover proposal anyway." We split off, and I watched him immediately reach for his phone. Across the room, Sienna glanced at hers, then quietly stepped out onto the terrace. Classic. But instead of following them or creating a spectacle, I made my way to Thomas and his wife, striking up a casual conversation about their recent trip to Morocco. All the while, I tracked Martin in my periphery as he joined Sienna outside briefly before slipping back inside. Never too close, never too long. The choreography of deception. Their little dance went on for nearly an hour. She, playing the polished professional and mingling with Meridian executives as our agency's representative. He, playing the charming department head, exchanging loaded glances with her across the ballroom. It might have been almost impressive, if it hadn't been so pathetic. Watching them perform, so sure of their subtlety, was like watching actors in a play I had already rewritten. They thought they were navigating a delicate affair. Sophisticated, hidden, clever. But every gesture, every glance, was part of a scene I had orchestrated months ago. I wasn't just watching, I was directing. And they didn't even know they were already in Act 3. At exactly 9:30 p.m., I excused myself from a conversation and walked toward the stage, where the CEO was preparing to begin his address. This moment had been arranged weeks in advance, secured through a favor called in with the CEO's wife, a longtime client who happened to adore me. "Before we begin with our formal remarks," the CEO said into the mic, "I'd like to invite Cassandra Westwell to the stage. Many of you know her as the founder of Westwell & Co., a firm that's played a pivotal role in the success of several of our subsidiary brands this year." A quiet wave of murmurs swept the crowd. This wasn't on the program. Martin looked stunned, his face losing color as I ascended the steps to the podium, the spotlight catching my red gown just right. "Thank you for that kind introduction," I began, my voice steady and composed. "Meridian Financial has been a valued partner of Westwell & Co. for years, and I look forward to continuing and expanding our collaboration in the year ahead." I paused, scanning the audience until my eyes locked on both Martin and Sienna. "In fact," I said, "we recently welcomed a talented new strategist to our team, someone I believe will help redefine how financial services firms like Meridian engage their markets. Sienna Torres, would you please join me on stage?" Silence. Sienna stood frozen. Her champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Martin looked as if he'd been gut-punched. Panic was written all over his face. The moment stretched, deliciously tense, as the reality dawned. She wasn't just being called out for praise. She was being exposed to the one person she never expected to be standing at the microphone. And yet, there I was, composed, cordial, terrifying in my calm. Slowly, visibly shaken, Sienna crossed the room. Her professional instincts must have kicked in just enough to override the sheer dread on her face. She stepped onto the stage, heels clicking like punctuation marks. I extended my hand with a warm smile. Sienna has been a phenomenal addition to our firm, I continued smoothly. Her insight, creativity, and work ethic have made a strong impression on the entire team and on me personally as her direct supervisor. Turning toward her, I kept my tone pleasant. Sienna, would you like to say a few words about your vision for marketing innovation in the financial sector? Trapped, she had no choice. To her credit, she took the mic with trembling fingers and gave a concise, articulate answer about digital engagement and brand transparency, though the slight shake in her voice betrayed the storm inside her. When she finished, I stepped forward and reclaimed the microphone. Thank you, Sienna. I consider myself lucky to work alongside such remarkable talent. I paused, letting the silence stretch just enough. Loyalty and integrity are values I hold above all else, both in business and in personal relationships. My eyes found Martin in the crowd. He was sweating now, visibly. Speaking of personal relationships, I continued smoothly, I'd like to take this moment to recognize my husband, Martin Westwell. I scanned the room. Martin, darling, where are you? Don't be shy. Reluctantly, he raised his hand. Dozens of heads turned in unison. After 17 years of marriage, I said, smiling gently, I've learned that transparency is essential to success. Wouldn't you agree, Martin? He nodded stiffly, clearly scrambling to gauge how much I knew and what I intended to do with that knowledge. Wonderful, I said, and in that same spirit of transparency, I have one more announcement to make. The room fell dead silent. Martin looked like he might faint. Sienna had gone completely still at my side. Westwell & Co. will be opening a new division in London next month, I said, my voice steady. And I've selected Sienna Torres to lead that office, effective immediately. Scattered applause followed, confused, hesitant. This wasn't the public exposure they had begun bracing for. Sienna stared at me in disbelief. It's a remarkable opportunity, I continued. A 3-year minimum contract, generous relocation support, a significant raise, and full creative autonomy. The paperwork is ready. We can finalize it this evening if you'd like. I turned to her with a composed smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Unless something's keeping you here? Our gazes locked, and in that instant she knew. She understood that I knew. Everything. And she realized what I was offering wasn't punishment, but something far more gracious. A clean exit. A second chance. Thousands of miles from the chaos she had unwittingly helped create. I'm honored, she stammered. Yes, I accept. This time the applause came louder. I reached out, shaking her hand firmly, perfect for the cameras, for the press. Excellent. And one final update, I said, turning back to the crowd. After much reflection, I've decided to dissolve a personal partnership while strengthening my professional ones. Martin's face fell as realization set in. The legal documents were delivered to our home this afternoon, I added calmly. I'm confident we can handle this transition as adults. A wave of stunned silence followed, then reluctant applause, thunderous in its discomfort. I stepped down from the stage, heels clicking, as whispers rippled across the ballroom. Thomas approached almost immediately, his face a conflicted blend of awe and awkwardness. That was a statement, he said. Was it? I replied innocently. I've always believed in handling both personal and business matters efficiently. Across the room, Martin was already slipping out, phone pressed tightly to his ear, likely scrambling to reach legal counsel. A few of his colleagues gave him wide berth, carefully distancing themselves from the wreckage. Meanwhile, Sienna remained on stage, still stunned, still absorbing the full weight of what had unfolded. When our eyes met one final time, I gave her a small, deliberate nod. Not of forgiveness, just understanding. I wasn't quite there yet, but there was a flicker of acknowledgement between us, a quiet understanding that we had both been manipulated by the same man. As I prepared to leave, she approached me cautiously. I didn't know, Sienna said quietly, about you, about who you really were. He told you his wife was cold, distant, obsessed with her career. I finished the sentence for her, emotionally unavailable. Her face flushed. Yes. I've read the messages, I added evenly. The London offer is real, I said, my tone matter of fact. The decision is yours. but I'd suggest thinking carefully about any man who lies that effortlessly to both his wife and his mistress. I never meant to hurt anyone, she whispered. And yet, I replied simply. As I turned to go, she called after me. Why didn't you just fire me when you found out? I paused, considering the question. Because that would have been reactive, not strategic, and because sometimes the most meaningful consequences aren't the most visible. There was a flicker of confusion in her eyes, maybe even guilt, but I didn't wait for it to settle. That wasn't mine to carry. I had already done the hard thing. Spared her the public unraveling she'd never recover from, not out of mercy, but because she was never the one who owed me the most. I left her standing there, walked through the stares and whispers of Martin's colleagues, and stepped alone into the cool night air. The chill cut through my skin, but I welcomed it. It grounded me in the moment. The aftermath wasn't filled with fire or chaos, just quiet, finality, and strangely, a sense of relief. For the first time in months, I let myself feel the full gravity of it all. Not just Martin's betrayal, but the transformation it had forced in me. I had given everything to our marriage, and they had treated it like nothing. But by responding with calculation instead of chaos, with strategy instead of spite, I had reclaimed what mattered most: my dignity, my future, and my power. My phone buzzed with a message from Martin. How long have you known? I didn't respond. Some questions don't deserve answers. 6 months later, I sat in my London office, overlooking the Thames, reviewing Q2 projections with my UK team. Sienna had accepted the position in the end. A decision that surprised me at first, but ultimately made sense. She was rebuilding, redefining, and putting an ocean between herself and Martin. I respected the decision, if not necessarily the person who made it. Our working relationship remained strictly professional. We never discussed Martin again. She never tried to explain or apologize. I never invited her to. The unspoken agreement worked. 2 women moving forward, each on her own path, away from the man who had deceived them both. The divorce finalized quickly. Martin, anxious to avoid further embarrassment, accepted my terms without much pushback. His career at Meridian, irreparably damaged, not because of the affair itself, but because of the optics, being so thoroughly outplayed by his wife. In finance, they'll tolerate plenty. But weakness? That's unforgivable. I heard occasional updates through mutual friends. He'd taken a job at a smaller firm, sold the house at a loss, and was dating again. A younger woman from his gym. Some men never learn. As for me, I expanded Westwell & Co. to 3 more international locations, doubled our client base, and purchased a sleek apartment overlooking Central Park for when I traveled to New York. My life had been rebuilt from the ground up, entirely on my terms. The pain hadn't vanished. Betrayal always leaves scars, but time dulls the edges. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night, replaying scenes from my marriage, searching for red flags I should have caught sooner. But those memories no longer controlled me. They were just fragments of a story that shaped me, but never shattered me. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, an unexpected email arrived from Sienna. The London office was flourishing under her leadership, exceeding quarterly projections for the 3rd cycle in a row. At the end of her comprehensive report, she had tacked on a personal note. I know we'll never talk about what happened, but I want you to know I've learned from it. Not just in business, but as a person. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you chose something else. I won't forget that. I closed the email without replying. Some acknowledgments don't require answers. That evening, I attended a finance networking dinner. Alone. As I navigated through the room of London's sharpest executives, a distinguished man with salt and pepper hair approached me. Cassandra Westwell? He asked in a crisp accent. Your reputation precedes you. Alexander Harrington, Blackwell Partners. Nice to meet you, I replied, accepting his handshake. I've heard quite the story, he said with a knowing smile, about how you manage complicated situations. I held his gaze. I believe in turning challenges into opportunities, Mr. Harrington. It's simply good business. And apparently, he said, amused, effective in your personal life as well. The same principles apply, I replied. Assess the situation clearly, respond strategically, not emotionally, and always play the long game. He chuckled. I'd love to hear more about that philosophy, perhaps over dinner sometime. 6 months ago, I would have declined. Too raw. Too guarded. Still healing. But as I stood there, I realized something had changed. I wasn't the woman who had first noticed those strange credit card charges, who had read those texts in quiet devastation. That woman had been shocked, hurt, dismantled. But the woman standing here, she had faced betrayal, strategized through it, and emerged not just whole, but sharper, stronger. In control. I'd like that, I said simply. Later that night, as rain traced quiet lines across my window, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had led me here. I had once hired my husband's mistress, without her knowing who I was. It had been a decision forged from pain, but delivered with precision. And no, it had never really been about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about seizing back control of a story that had been hijacked. Some would call it vindictive. I called it necessary, rebuilding, truth. And no, I didn't regret any of it. Not the long nights of silent planning, not the public reckoning, not even the heartbreak that had sparked it all. Because without that fire, I might have stayed in a marriage built on false foundations, pretending everything was fine, settling for comfort over truth. Instead, I'd found something far more valuable than vengeance. I'd found myself. As I accepted Alexander's invitation, I understood something else clearly. This wasn't closure. This was chapter 1. Eric and Sienna had unknowingly handed me a gift, the space to reconstruct my life from the ground up, on my terms. The perfect revenge wasn't destroying them. It was thriving without them.